Cycling was part of my life from a very young age.
Both my parents were avid cyclists, both represented Great Britain at the World Championships, both national medalists, so from a very young age I was always around bike riders, cycling, always going to bike races. Some of my earliest babysitters were cyclists. Barry Hoban's dad used to come over and look after me.
When I was in college, I remember my brother bought a brand new bike and I thought, oh, that looks nice. So I pinched it without him knowing. And I accidentally fell off it on the way to college and I scratched the frame. So I had to dive into Halfords and try and find a spray paint that was similar to the colour of the bike. Then I rubbed it down carefully and sprayed it and did a really good job and he never knew. And I managed to put the bike back without him knowing that I'd actually stolen it. But I did actually enjoy it, apart from the fall off bit.
Well, the interest in cycling came through my dad, who was a bit of a cyclist in the 50s. So he had lots of, by the time I was sort of being brought up, his interest had not exactly diminished, but he wasn't really riding his bike very much. But he still had quite a few old cycling magazines from the 60s lying around, and looking back, those mags obviously meant quite a lot to him because they'd been through 2 or 3 house moves with us. And those mags lived in the outside toilet, which was a sort of small shack full of spiders, and I used to go out there and sit on the wooden seat and read those magazines till my bum went sore.
Well, actually, when I was maybe this age here, I don't know, 7 or 8, I suppose, my mother bought a second-hand Gresham Flyer 3-wheeler bicycle, and my brother, who was 3 years older than me, always used to sit on the back, and we used to tear down the street, and I'd almost take it to bed with me, this bike. So I think that's exactly where it started.
Well, I started cycling with the local club in my town, Carrick-on-Suir. And the reason I did start in the club, that there was always a club in Carrick-on-Suir before I got into bike racing for many years before. But within the club, they had a little bit of, or maybe a big bit of a break-up in the committee, and then some of the guys that left the club, they started a second club in the town. And I had a brother, Joseph, who was 2 years older. He was at secondary school in Carrick-on-Suir, and he started because the guys from the club were starting up, they went to the school. And he started probably, I think, about 2 months before.
I guess it was inevitable, really, because my grandparents were cyclists in North London back in the 30s, and my mum and dad both rode bikes and primarily cycle touring, but so you know, cycling family through and through. So I guess it was inevitable it was going to happen.
Living on the Ashdown Forest back in the day, in the mid-'70s, you know, the one of the modes of transport was a bicycle. You know, obviously it was a lot of different back then. You know, I had a mate, my brother, a couple of mates down the road. We all had bikes, and in between that and playing football, we just used to ride around the forest the whole time and have kind of BMX races. There was not a BMX race, but there was a kind of path that had these ups and downs, and we used to regularly race around this. Maybe it took 1 minute circuit, and then we progressed onto longer rides to the extent of going down to the coast and back. You know, when in the mid-'70s, when I was about 16, my brothers and friends were 13, 14, 12 even.
I mean, I started coming to Romford Skate Park when it first opened on one of those cheap little plastic skateboards. You know, back in like 1978, and then all of a sudden I discovered BMX. You know, I was living in Essex, went down my local bike shop, and all of a sudden saw these mongoose bikes. I was like, wow, you know, these like really like colourful, you know, like yellow tough wheels and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, wow, you know, I want a piece of this, you know. And then I started riding here about 1981, and then by about 1983. For want of a better word, I was pretty handy.
I had a friend who I used to skateboard with, and he sort of got tired of skateboarding and decided he was going to build a bicycle, and I'd never heard anyone actually build a bicycle. I just assumed you bought one from a shop, and they just lived in sheds, and that was the end of it, and you rode them and then you put them away again. But he seemed to think the bicycle was a lot more complex and more exciting than that. And I went to visit him one day, and he took me to visit a friend of his who had a racing bicycle that he said I should go and look at. And we went around to his house, and he duly took us to his garage and took it down from the wall. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a bike hung on pegs on a wall. Normally they're next to the lawnmower or something. And it was resting a sheet. He pulled the sheet off, and there was this John Perks racing bike with Campag throughout.
I went out for a ride on my sister's bike, and actually got a bike of my own at the time. And I went over what we call a local common, and I actually saw what turned out to be a bike race. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I found it very exciting. I mean, I was only about 12, 13 years of age, so it would be in the early 60s. And I sat on the corner for ages because there were arrows there waiting to see if he came again, and he never did. And I went home and I sat down and had my lunch, and my mum said, I said to my mum what I'd seen. I said, I'm going to have a go at that one day.
I did have visions. I'd ride them down to the pub in Yarmouth and back. But
it's not a pub bike. It's not a pub bike.
But if I rocked up down there and my mates would go, yeah, that's all right, what is it? And you know, they wouldn't know what it was. And if I went and left that anywhere, it'd disappear in about 5 seconds flat, wouldn't it?